like I said, you all have an assignment that is using form criticism. And form criticism is a type of exegesis, right? It's one of the many tools that we looked at. And form criticism deals primarily with genre, right? Genre and the kind of life setting that a work would have been produced in, okay? So the kinds of questions that form criticism brings up are these. These are like the four main questions of form criticism. And that PDF that I pointed you to on Moodle has these questions verbatim, okay? The first question is, what is the literary form or genre of the whole work in the particular text, right? So especially when we're looking through the book of Genesis, right? These are a lot of stories, a lot of things compiled together. There may be genres within, multiple genres within one chapter, within one section of verses, right? There may be myth that then goes into a song, that then goes into a different, I think there's like back into myth or something like that, right? So it's good to identify what genres you're working with when you're looking at a text. So that, for example, you don't react like the people did in Britain to the War of the Worlds being broadcast, right? So that you can respond correctly to the text. The next question is, does the text follow or diverge from the usual expectations, right? We talked about that with Goldilocks, right? If Goldilocks shoots the bears, that's going to wildly depart from what we usually consider a fairy tale to do, okay? But there's also ways that the normal storylines within a particular genre or within like a fairy tale, for example, can change and it still functions within the genre well, right? It might just have something different. And whatever those differences are, we need to make sure we're paying attention to. What is the normal purpose or goal of this genre, right? That editorial you all read was trying to convince you of something, right? Fairy tales try to entertain and present a moral, right? There's those specific purposes and goals of each genre. And kind of in connection with that, what's the social context, or in what social context would the text of this genre have been used? Right? So when we look at Psalms, for example, we think, oh, these are liturgical, these are used in worship. Right? If we look at, fairy tales, we think bedtime stories. Right? So what's the social context that these texts would have been used for? Right? Given the genre that it's part of. So these are the questions of form criticism. So when we look at Genesis 1 and 2, which is what we're going to be doing in class today and Wednesday, these are how these questions start to look. You all, for that assignment, will be looking at Genesis 3. Okay, but as far as Genesis 1 and 2 go, what's the genre? Right? What's the general purpose of that genre? Do the creation narratives in Genesis 1 and 2 fit the typical form of that particular genre? What would the purpose be? Do we lose any meaning if we try to read this narrative as belonging to a different genre? Right, so these are going to kind of be the questions we want to have in view as we start looking at this text. So over these next 2 days, we will be doing form criticism in here. Right, so that will give you a good idea of what your work is supposed to look like that will be due Friday. So, let's dig into this. This is a depiction of Tiamat and Marduk from the Babylonian Creation myth, the Enuma Elish. Okay, and that is, let's spell that out. I know a lot of you are thinking, wait, I thought we were going to be talking about Genesis today. Well, in order to talk about Genesis, we need to find some context, right? We need to understand the context into which Genesis is, or from which Genesis is coming from. Right? What are other creation stories of the ancient Near East that the Israelites would have been exposed to and that might have influenced their own stories, or that they might have used as a template to then write their own and make very purposeful changes in order to convey their own meaning. Okay? So this is why we're looking at the Babylonian creation myth. Now real quick, just to get some reference here, you guys recognize this, right? Good. If we're speaking of Babylon, where exactly is Babylon on this map? bottom.
Towards
the Persian Gulf.
Towards the Persian Gulf. So here's
right there, yeah.
good. So this is Babylon right here. Okay. Now at the height of the Babylonian Empire, the Empire of Babylon kind of extended there-ish. Okay. So at the height of their empire, they controlled a lot of area. Now, what I want to kind of draw our attention to especially is where Babylon is located regarding the two major rivers and the Red Sea. Because this is going to kind of impact how they tell their creation story. You notice how they're located not too far from where the Tigris and the Euphrates come down into the Red Sea, right? Keep that in mind as we talk about their stories. Or this story in particular.
I thought that was a Persian Gulf.
Persian Gulf, I'm sorry. I'm all mixed up. Let's see what's over there. Thank you guys. I would write it, but I kind of want to erase this anyways. Okay.
So it's how
This is the
similar
Persian
to
Gulf.
Persian Gulf.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. So, now the best way to do this story is kind of ridiculous, but ridiculous in kind of a fun way. So we're going to kind of act this out a little bit, get some people to kind of stand in place of each of these characters, because it gets confusing to keep up with everybody, especially because they have ancient names, which are hard for my brain anyways to keep up with. So, at the beginning of the Enuma Elish, we have two gods. We have Apsu and Tiamat. Apsu, and we have Tiamat. Okay, this is our guy, this is our lady. Okay? Apsu and Tiamat. Now what's fun about each of these is that Apsu means fresh water, and Tiamat means salt water.
So we're salty.
So Tiamat means salt water, Apsu means fresh water. Which one of those, when you think about fresh water and you think about salt water, do you typically think of as more powerful?
Salt water.
Why?
The ocean, larger body of water.
Yeah, you think about oceans, right? You think about huge bodies of water, you think about tides, you think about monsoons, you have so much energy associated with salt water that you don't with fresh water, okay? And that's going to play out in how the story goes. Now, the story kind of starts a little bit ambiguously. We have these two gods, and it never really says they procreate. But we pretty much end up having two gods come from Apsu and Tiamat. And I'm trying to, let me see if I can actually bring up their names here. Escaping me at the moment. There we are. If you look down there at the bottom of the first one that's not bolded, Lamu and Lahamu. All right, now this isn't too important, but it is interesting to consider. And Lahamu. These names mean, and it's fairly, doesn't really matter which is which here, but silt, mud, right? That grimy stuff that happens when you've got a lot of soil or dirt being turned up by water, right? These are their first two offspring mentioned, right? Lamu and Lahamu were brought forth by name they were called. Okay, these are the first other two gods mentioned other than Apsu and Tiamat. Given the map that we just had on the board, why does this make sense as the beginning of the creation myth? Did I get there? What was that?
I was just saying from the larger body of water to the river.
Yeah.
Good. So it's almost like we have Tiamat
Yeah. The two rivers
and Apsu, right? This area down here where the Tigris and the Euphrates are coming into the Persian Gulf, right? And that kind of fertile muck that is created here is kind of seen as the birthplace of the world, right? Is how this is getting narrated, right? And this makes sense, right? You have civilizations that are like very much coming here because it is fertile, right? Remember we drew our nice little fertile crescent here, right? So it makes sense that if this is a fertile crescent, right? This is how we talk about creation and procreation, about being fertile, and we see how being infertile is a curse in ancient Near Eastern world, right? So this is kind of the birthplace here of creation, right? And this is how most creation myths go. Most creation myths place creation beginning where they are, okay? And then the first people created are the people that come from that region. Okay, good. So if I can get, let's see, I need some people to kind of demonstrate here. Apsu and Tiamat. Actually, I might keep this one open. Okay, let's get, if you can be my Tiamat, all right? So if you can stand, and if you, sorry, my Apsu, and you can be my Tiamat, yeah? So if you two can stand, all right? So let's make it easier to kind of keep everything on track. Okay, now, Apsu and Tiamat have lots of gods together. So you all are the created deities from Apsu and Tiamat, yeah? Now you all, being the children you are a noisy bunch. Okay? So much so that you are incredibly disturbing your parents, and they can get no rest and find no peace. Okay? Now, Tiamat, as annoyed as she is a little more patient than Apsu, because what Apsu wants to do to get you all quiet is not to give you all a pacifier, he's going to kill you all. This is your plan. You're like, my kids are a little noisy, I'm done with this. This is done, right? So Apsu has had enough, right? So he wants to kill you all. So he consults, what was his name? Mumu is his loyal trustee, his counselor. So you are Mumu, right? He consults Mumu. They concoct this plan to kill you all. Now, unfortunately, this is a myth coming out of the ancient Near East. So even though Tiamat is a formidable foe, most of these characters are going to be male, which is unfortunate because we have so many wonderful female actors here today. Right? Okay, so he consults Mumu, and they concoct this plan. Right? Their ways are truly loathsome to me. By day I find no relief. So on, I will destroy, I will wreck their ways. That quiet may be restored. Let us have rest. Okay? Now, Ea, our friend here, gets word of this plan. Okay? And Ea is not too happy about the possibility that he and all his brothers and sisters are going to be put down, right? So, let's see here. Hold on. She fears cause her husband. Oh, yeah. Tiamat, by the way, you found out about this little thing and you're upset. You tell him not to do it, but he doesn't listen because he's a man. Okay? Right? So just to say, you did find out and you did have a little bit of say, but he's not gonna listen. So what Ea does then is he goes, gets his cronies, who are all of you, right? Or some of you, I should say, and decides to kill Apsu. And then he places Mumu in prison for the rest of his days. So, Apsu and Mumu, you guys are out. You guys are out.
Yeah.
Now, Ea and the rest of you are pretty happy about this arrangement now. You're like, we're safe. That little threat has been dealt with.
We can make all the noise we want.
You make all the noise you want, right? And you continue to get noisy because of that, right? However, there's some gods who were kind of loyal over here to Apsu, right? Who kind of had his back, who understood for some reason. And they go to Tiamat and they say, are you just going to let Ea and the rest of these gods get away with it? Right? And Tiamat's like, you've got a point.
Oh my goodness.
You've got a point. I shouldn't let them get away with it. So they start concocting a plan to come after these guys. Tiamat, you create some of the nastiest things that the world has ever seen. Some of those things have really silly names, like the power weapon. Don't ask me. You create some crazy things and some crazy beasts, right? That happening, Ea, you knew that you could take care of Tiamat. Or sorry, that you could take care of Apsu and you could take care of Enuma. They weren't a big deal. You kind of wet yourself when you hear that Tiamat's coming after you, right? This is a little bit more dangerous foe. Okay. So you go to the guys and you're like, please, can somebody fight like for us? Can somebody please do this, because I don't have it in me to do this. By the way, during this time, you also had a son, and his name is Marduk. You can be our Marduk. There we go. And just like that, Ea can't believe how cool of a son he has in Marduk.
Hey.
Right? Marduk is just it. Like, how do I put this? Yeah, you pretty much have like a bumper sticker that says like, my student can beat up your honor student, like in reference to Marduk. Like that's how Marduk is portrayed in the text. He's just it.
Oh, that makes sense. Why would you be this?
So Marduk, you, after all these other gods have wussed out, you go to Ea and say, look, like I'll take care of it. I'll deal with it. Here's the catch though. You have to give me some supreme control over everything. My word goes if I do this. Right? And Ea's like, well, I can either keep control and die, or I can give you control and live. So here you go. Go for it. Godspeed. Right? Or God's speed, whatever it would be the case for polytheistic Babylon. So, yeah, you can kind of take a seat, because you have handed over the reins to Marduk. Okay? Now Marduk, being as impressive as he is, harnesses the power of the storms and of the winds and goes after Tiamat. Okay? This is where the text gets a little gruesome. Because what Marduk is able to do, I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Let's see. Kind of a quick way. I think it's in. Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. They all decide that's fine. Marduk can have it. Let's see. That's okay. I can just describe it. So what you go against Tiamat. Now Tiamat, in the same way that kind of Apsu over here had his crony with Mumu, you have your crony, Jonah, you can be Kingu. Right? So you've kind of set Kingu in charge of your armies. Right? But for some reason Kingu really doesn't show up on the scene much, because Marduk just goes straight for you. And what Marduk does to Tiamat is he practically immobilizes her with all these winds, and then takes this wind, and when she is yelling or screaming or for some reason her mouth is wide open, and he blows a wind into her, right? And in doing so, in blowing this evil wind, it's called an evil wind, he blows this evil wind into her that was hiding behind him, and it keeps her mouth open and fills her belly. He then takes a bow and arrow, shoots it into Marduk, and kills her, splitting her in half. Or into Tiamat, sorry. So Tiamat, you have been vanquished.
That's at the bottom of the screen.
Is that right down there?
Yeah, the evil witch went follow behind.
Woohoo! You're not making this stuff up. I know this. Oops. I just lost it. Oh no, there it is. Okay. There we are. Right. The evil one. Oh, come on. Okay. While she had not yet shut her lips, as the terrible wind filled her belly, her body was distended and her mouth was wide open. He released the arrow, it tore her belly, it cut through her insides, splitting the heart. Having thus subdued her, he extinguished her life. He cast down her carcass to stand upon it. After he had slain Tiamat, the leader, her band was shattered, right? Her troop broken up. All you guys are like, peace out, like we're done. And the gods, her helpers, who marched at her side, trembling with terror, turned their backs about in order to save and preserve their lives. However, they couldn't escape, right? They're also trapped by those winds. And he made them captives and smashed their weapons, right? So Marduk had, you guys can take a seat. Marduk has vanquished Tiamat, and obviously now is put in charge of the gods. What then happens, see if I can just do it this way, it might be a lot easier. Whoops. Is he takes Tiamat's slim body and he creates the world out of her body. Now remember, she is salt water. So what he does is he takes half of Tiamat's body and makes it the sky, and half of it he makes the earth, essentially. All right, so you have the splitting of the waters, right? The waters above being half of Tiamat's body, and the waters below being the other half of her body. He then takes different body parts of her and creates the world out of it. Okay, like I said, it gets pretty gruesome. Putting her head into position, he formed her on the mountains, so on and so forth. Thus he covered the heavens and established the earth. In the midst of Tiamat he made flow, and we have text missing. So he created heaven and earth, the bounds established. What's that?
I was saying that where he calls to flow from the eyes. He refers to Titus.
Yeah, I mean, there's text missing. These like old pieces of stone, and sometimes parts are shattered off. So he creates the world from pretty much from her dead carcass. He then says, below I have hardened the ground for a building site. I will build a house. It will be my luxurious abode. I will found there in its temple. I will appoint its inner rooms, establish my sovereignty. When you come up from the Apsu for assembly, so on and so forth. Let's see here. You will spend the night in it. So pretty much the first thing he does after creating the world is create a temple for himself, right? And this temple is not only for himself, but it's also for the other gods. Because what Marduk then does is he takes Kingu, right? I'll write Kingu's name up here, just in case you're curious. This is Marduk, that's how it's spelled. And we had Kingu. He then takes Kingu, whose name humorously means unskilled laborer, as he very much proved himself to be. He takes Kingu, he pretty much slits his arteries and creates humankind out of the blood of Kingu, the unskilled laborer.
The one that killed the mother?
No, Kingu, remember, was Tiamat's commander-in-chief.
Oh.
Yeah. That was Joan. I love the Kingu. Okay. So humanity is formed from the body of this slain god in the same way that the world was formed from Tiamat's body. Okay.
But this is a myth.
This is the Babylonian creation.
Oh.
Okay. And then what happens is he creates humans in order to free the gods from their work. This is why humans are created in the Babylonian creation myth. It says explicitly, I think it's right here. Yep. I will take the blood-fashioned bone, I will establish a savage man, shall be his name. Truly savage man I will create. He shall be charged with the service of the gods, that the gods, they might be at ease. The way of the gods I will artfully alter. Right? So no longer did the gods have to work, no longer did the gods have to expend any kind of effort whatsoever, because the humans will take care of them. And this is the relationship of humanity to the gods, right? Is that the humans are created for the purpose of serving and taking care of the gods, right? And then Marduk's name is obviously extolled and praised, and he is made the ruler of the heavens. In this way, Babylon narrates its creation. Now, a couple things to kind of think about this. How, first of all, are the gods portrayed in this story?
The meaning is the type of people they are?
Yeah, how are they depicted?
Like,
They're mean,
all of them, you mean? All
or
of
just any of them.
them? I mean, straight to the point.
Incredibly powerful, right? What else?
Some a little spoiled, too.
Spoiled? Well, they're at least spoiled after what Marduk does. Yeah. Good. What else?
Not very honorable.
No, honor's not really a thing. I mean, they kind of deal with you kind of have the gods saying it's honorable to revenge for Apsu's death when they're talking to Tiamat, but there's not a lot of honor kind of language. It's more like you need revenge, you need to set this right, yeah. What else? Huh?
Distrust.
Distrust. There's a lot of distrust amongst the gods. Good. They're petty, right? We just want it quiet. Kill the rest of them so we can have quiet. Good. How is, in the brief little moments they have, how is humanity portrayed? Savage. Yeah, definitely.
Their desire to have control.
How so?
They're like, if one dies, then another one could come. And are we talking about like just ways they like have human qualities?
Oh no, sorry, but that was good. So that the ways the gods are anthropomorphic. No, which is good. Yeah, so the gods are very anthropomorphic. The ways that humanity is portrayed. So when we said like humanity, savage man, I will create. What's that?
Replaceable.
Yeah, replaceable.
But they're made out of whatever.
King's blood.
So that means they would be pretty much unskilled as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not really. They're nothing special here. Right? And they're created purely for service. Service of the gods. To take care of the gods. Good. How is creation itself portrayed?
Out of death.
Out of death, yeah. Out of death and conflict. Good. What about the relationship? And we kind of touched on this already, but just to say it clearly, the relationship of the gods to humans.
Just working for them.
Yeah, just servants. Good. This is the Babylonian creation myth. Okay, these are the major themes that come out of that myth. Right? Notice that this myth also supports temple worship. Right? Which means it's also going to maintain social hierarchies. Right? You need these priests at the top. You need priests who know how to take care of the gods. Because if you don't, then the gods are going to get really furious, and you've seen what happens on a cosmic scale when gods get angry. Right? So this myth not only says these kinds of things about God, humanity, creation, and that relationship, but it supports that temple of worship. It supports those social hierarchies. It supports and gives meaning to their way of life. Right? It supports and gives meaning to their way of life. Now, when we start turning to the creation myth in Genesis, we get a very different and at the same time very similar kind of story. Okay? So, the first thing that I need to mention first before I dig into this text, is the fact that in Genesis 1 and 2 are essentially two different creation stories. Okay, there's essentially two different creation stories in the beginning of Genesis that work to do two very different things. So what we're going to have to do in order to look at these stories and appreciate them for what they are is to deal with them separately. Okay. Luckily, they're nice and separated. You know, I think you all looked in your textbook at the flood narrative. So there's that box with the flood narratives that shows how the narratives are kind of interwoven. Luckily for us in Genesis, these two creation stories are kind of separated. The first one, for some reason, runs through like the first 3 or 4 verses of chapter 2, and then the second one starts. So we're just going to start here at Genesis 1, but we're going to look at both of them kind of in relationship to the Enuma Elish, which is why it's important that we know all this. So, starting in the beginning, right? And like we said, Genesis is probably not written first, but as this is where the whole narrative arc of the canon begins, it's a good place for us to begin. This is the title of it in Hebrew, right? Bereshith, right, which is just this word right here. And yes, these two words are the same. One just doesn't have vowel pointings. Right, and this is how we said that a lot of Hebrew books take their names. It's just that first word, right? And Bereshith just means in the beginning. Right? I'm not going to write this backwards, but in the beginning. Now, it's important to note when we think about how this text is starting with in the beginning, is for us, this obviously signifies kind of a temporal thing, right? At the beginning of the story, in the beginning, right? The same way that we say once upon a time. You are signifying that you are starting the story, right? But this is also doing something else in Hebrew, right? In the beginning isn't just saying this is the first thing temporally, but think about the ways we use the phrases top chef or head of the class. Right? When we use these phrases, we don't mean that this chef is literally on the top of anything. We don't mean that literally this person is in the very front. Right? We're signifying importance. So by saying in the beginning, this isn't just saying, okay, we're starting the story. It's saying this is how things were intended to be. This is the created order as it was intended. Right? Does that make sense? So in the beginning, and then we have the verb for created, bara Elohim, God. In the beginning, God created. Now, this second word, there's a lot of controversy over this word. And the controversy is how to exactly translate it. In Hebrew, there's verbs operate in ways that sometimes get tricky, especially when they have certain letters in them. Think about the way we have, we don't say he run to the store, he ran, right? And that's just a vowel change, right? Hebrew doesn't have vowels in the original, right? So there's a little bit of, I would say controversy, but dialogue about just how to translate God created. Another way of thinking that another possibility, or a couple other possibilities for this translation, is in the beginning of God's creating. Okay? Or, let me see, what was the other one here? I'm trying to remember. Or when God began creating. Right? Because the focus we have to remember of this text is right here. The focus is not creation itself. The focus is on God and on God's activity of creating. Okay? So instead of saying, the text didn't say, in the beginning of the world, this happened. It just said, when God began creating in the beginning. Right? God is our subject of this sentence. And because of that, we need to keep in mind that this text is about God's creating. Right? First and foremost. And this is why taking a scientific approach to Genesis kind of falls short. Because the scientific approach to Genesis that tries to say that this text is laying out scientifically what happened, one, it misses the fact that this is very much working from a mythological genre. But it's also missing the fact that the world is not the subject of this story as it sets out. That God's creating is the subject of this story. God's creating is the focus of this story. Okay. So, in the beginning, God created, or in the beginning of God's creating, the heavens and the earth. Okay, it's how this story starts off. Now, what's interesting too, if you have your Bibles with you, look to verse 2 there. Genesis 1, verse 2. Just take a look at it. You can read verse 1 and verse 2 together. Verse 1 and verse 2. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, it says the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. What is in the beginning of creation?
Water.
God and water. Right. Let's see. Do I remember? I don't know if I'm going to take time to try to find it. Oh, face of the waters. Face of the waters. There we go. Good. So at the beginning, we have water and we have God. Right? It's important to note that here in Genesis, we do not have what is called creation ex nihilo, which is a fun way of saying creation out of nothing. We do not have creation out of nothing. What we're going to see that we have is actually creation, or let me say, order out of chaos. This is what we find in Genesis. There it is. Water. Remember when we talked about Tiamat and Apsu? And which one we thought would be more like a better symbol of power would be salt water? For much of the ancient Near East, the ocean was this symbol of chaos and power. Okay? Which makes a lot of sense. If you are not, and the Hebrew peoples especially were not a very seafaring people. This is why, if any of you are familiar with the New Testament stories, when the disciples are out on the sea and they start peeing themselves because of the storm, it's because they don't really like being out on the water, right? Because the water is seen as a symbol of chaos, right? And so what our story, what the text in Genesis starts with, is God in this expanse of chaos, or this expanse of watery chaos, right? And it says it's formless and void, right? This formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, right? So there is just this chaotic water in the beginning of the creation story. And then what happens at the end of that verse 2, where it says, a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Does that sound at all familiar from what we were just talking about?
The wind, the blue.
Yeah, you've got in the Enuma Elish this evil wind that destroys Tiamat, right? And the word here in Hebrew for wind is really fun. The word is ruah, R-U-A-H, and like transliterating it from the Hebrew, ruah. And ruah means spirit or breath, right? Think about, let's see, has anybody here like worked with EMS before, or done any like EMS training, or CPR training or anything like that? Yeah, a little bit. CPR that would be kind of a good analogy. Do any of you know how they, like what counts as somebody being dead nowadays? Like when you say like this person is dead, what counts as being dead?
Brain dead.
Good, brain dead, right? And we know that if there hasn't been a pulse for a certain amount of time, then we can say the person is brain dead, right? Prior to that, what counted as somebody being dead? Heart. No heartbeat. Person doesn't have a heartbeat, we know they're dead, right? This is why, like nowadays, like if somebody's heart stops, we think, well, it's only been a certain amount of time, we can bring them back. They're not brain dead yet, right? So it was the heart before that. What was before the heart? Breath. You said, Kai, you said, yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly, breath. This is why even in Shakespeare, which Shakespeare I think is, actually I guess would have been around that time and before then, you have this idea of holding up a mirror or a piece of glass to somebody's nostrils and seeing if it fogs up, right? And if it does fog up, it means they're alive. If it doesn't fog up, they're dead, right? So kind of like going, like we're like, whoa, that's crazy. Like don't just leave them if they're not breathing. You know, it's like doing CPR. But this is what counted as being alive, and this is what counted as being alive in ancient Israel and in the ancient Near East is breath. So breath was very much connected with one's life, with one's spirit. This is spirit. The idea of spirit is kind of this animating force, right? And that's why you can't like really take away this idea of like somebody being alive in their breath and the spirit being in them. When the spirit leaves, their breath leaves, which is why they're dead, right?
As long as they have breath, they have a spirit.
Yeah, as long as they're breathing, the spirit is in them. It's kind of this idea, right? Once they stop breathing, the spirit's gone, right? Because it would no longer like fog up anything. Exactly. So what's interesting here is that from this perspective, when we go back and read verse 1 with that idea, that's why some translations will say a wind from God, and some will say a breath from God, and some will use the word spirit, because these are all kind of interchangeable. Okay? But it's interesting, too, that even though in the same way we have a wind, like the Enuma Elish did, this wind is very different, right? Because unlike the Enuma Elish, this wind isn't going to kill another god, because there aren't any other gods. And we'll notice, too, when we start talking about this a little bit more, just how far this text goes, and I think we talked about this before, to make sure you know there are no other deities other than God doing this work. Okay? So this wind goes out, and it doesn't kill another god because there are no other gods to kill. It just goes over the waters, over the chaos, and this is what starts creating. This is what starts giving us order out of chaos. Okay? Now take a look at verses, I guess it's 3 through 31. Just kind of glance over those and see if there is a pattern that you see arising.
You said 3 through 11?
3 through 31, 3 through the end of chapter 1.
Okay.
Just kind of glance through those, see if you see a pattern emerge.
God said, what he saw and said.
Okay, so what comes first? What happens first?
God said. The light.
Good. So we said God said. So God says something. What happens after God says it?
It is.
Good. It is. What happens after it is? Right? God sees it. What after God, we'll say, let there be. Good. And then then it is, and then God sees it, and then what happened after he sees it?
He separated.
No, something with everyone.
He approves it. He said
He approves it, yeah. God approves. I've done a good thing. It is good. God approves. Good. There's a couple variations within it, but this is the basic structure, right? God says, let there be, it is, God sees it, God approves, right? Notice too what's interesting, some similarities. Did anybody else see another similarity here between this story as you were glancing through in the Enuma Elish?
He actually, when he was making the earth, he actually took parts. So that means that he actually had to maybe visualize it, see
Okay.
it, and then make it so.
Okay, maybe. What the text kind of gets at is this creation through speaking, right? Which is also, we also find that in Egyptian creation myths, this idea of speaking into creation. So God speaks it into creation. But there is this kind of, in a sense, physical act that happens.
when he separated the waters.
Good.
Yeah, so
We have God separates. Separates the waters, right? This harkens back to that idea of Tiamat and Marduk. Marduk taking Tiamat's body, splitting it in half to create the heavens above and the earth below, right? We kind of get this model, oops, that you can't see, right? And this is up on, and will be up on Moodle, right? The waters above and the waters below, right? The splitting up, and then you put this the mountains and the land in that. Okay, so it's not that there's just waters and then there's this ground expanse that you then put like little bits of water in. It's that there's waters and there's waters and then there's land placed into that separation, right? Placed into that space, created by that separation, right? Good. We're at the end of our time.